forward is being Atlantified. Polar ice loss accelerating. Ocean tipping points, part 1, part 2. Interactions among tipping elements, part 1, part 2. What influence will icebergs from Greenland have on MOC? Warming oceans and sea level rises. Ocean heat content update, number 1, 2022. Jim responds, why 5 to 11 Celsius increase by 2100? And that's a good explanation of the different toxic algal blooms in Alaskan Arctic. Plastics and the microbiome, part 1 and 2. Late quaternary abrupt climate change links to present. And some of the videos Jim does, he's reviewing a lot of peer-reviewed literature, most of it very relevant, just recently published. And a lot of it has to do with referencing different major geological changes that happened in the past, the rate and the speed and what happened with acidity in the oceans and such, linking those changes and past extinction events to the present one and what's going on now. Bottom trawling adds carbon to the atmosphere, and that's like those ships that dredge the bottom for fish and food are digging up carbon that's been sequestered at the bottom of the ocean. A lot of these are self-explanatory. Ice loss, Atlantification of Barents and Kara Seas, part 1 and 2. And I learned a lot about the different oceans, not the different oceans, the different seas in the Arctic Ocean, going over Jim Massa-science channel. Bats, climate change, and COVID. That was an interesting video for sure. Conger ice shelf collapse. Iceberg size of New York City breaks off. First East Antarctic ice shelf collapse in human history. It's another good one. Antarctic circumpolar current is getting faster. Humans have broken a fundamental law of the ocean. IPC, so this I'll go through real quick. Jim did this segment on different parts of the IPCC report where he basically rips to shreds the whole 2050, 2100 argument of a lot of the science being presented by the very conservative scientific body known as the IPCC. IPCC report, so I don't want to keep repeating that, so I'll just say the subhead. Atlas of human suffering, wetter, drier conditions, rich nations all affected by climate change. IPCC report stop emissions and all warming stops in 3 to 4 years. And he said WTAF, you know what that means. Jim will say things like, it's bullshit. And it's just that his interjections really add to the flavor and the color of his reviews of things. And I really enjoy that from him. So if he watches this at any point, I appreciate the animation, the reaction you have to the conservative science. 3.3 billion people at risk. Worldwide food and water shortages. These are all IPCC report critiques. Safe limits already passed. Marine species habitats endangered due to changing oceanic conditions as a result of climate change. IPCC report bleaching on Great Barrier Reef. So that's all. That was a really good segment of them, and that was like April and May of 2022. That's when those were posted. So you can just type those in the search bar or look at his channel. Increased water vapor in stratosphere coupled to hothouse Earth. Plastics in our blood. We have 6 to 8 micrograms of plastic in our bloodstream always. Really good to think about every day. Ocean warming effects and need to monitor carbon. Fracking sites reduce lifespan of the elderly. Focus on methane. Duh. I think he put that in the title. Corn-based ethanol worse than gasoline. Changing snow patterns in the U.S. Coastal darkening. Kelp is in danger. Changing jet stream. Corporations underreport emissions. Future summer marine heat waves. Sea ice loss impacts ocean basins heat exchange. Changes in Arctic freshwater outflow through Fram Strait. And that has a lot to do with the Arctic and water changes. Chukchi Sea is acidifying. That I believe that's the sea between Alaska and Siberia. Fires in the Arctic, more CH4, more problems. Wind stress, AMOC, increasing Arctic solar radiation. Sea level rise is accelerating. Methane feedback loops, unlivable conditions. Evidence for upwelling in western boundary currents. Storms increase CO2 outgassing from southern oceans. Thermal properties of ESAS LabTev impacts on permafrost and methane. So that's just talking about the various seas in the Arctic and their thermal radiation give off, and how that's impacting permafrost melt, which is giving methane out into the atmosphere exponentially. Changes in Arctic stratification. variability in surface salinity, and enhanced Ekman pumping in Canada Basin. Role of tides on sea ice loss, marine heat waves in Siberian seas. Carbon sequestration in oceans are decreasing. Ocean oxygen concentration levels decreasing. And that I thought was really interesting because I didn't really know that plankton and such needed, even though they produce our oxygen, they need oxygen already in their environment to exist. So they're being asphyxiated, I believe is the word, in the ocean, which is kind of crazy. Climate change is shifting Earth's axis. Abrupt climate change in tropics, subtropics, and lake quaternary. That's another like look at the past to today. Increased precipitation in Arctic transitioning to rain by 2100. And Jim, again, he talks a lot about the whole 2100 as a joke because there's already rain over Greenland, as Jason Box has been putting out, atmospheric rivers even over Greenland of rain. Oil companies exit ANWR. It's not really worth going through. Arctic temps highly sensitive to greenhouse gas levels. Beaufort Gyre's role in sea ice loss. Beaufort Gyre is very important. That's this rotating gyre that is above Alaska and I believe they're called the Queen Elizabeth Islands, which are those little island chain at the very north of Canada. And that gyre is important because it pulls heat in and rotates it, and the ice melts where that heat is being pulled in. Beaufort Gyre's diffusive staircase. So I would definitely check out every Beaufort Gyre video. Effects of reduced, I would check out all of these, but just saying. Effects of reduced sulfate emissions on global temperatures. Salinity effects on ENSO. Thawing Yodoma permafrost releases nitrous oxide. So that's Siberian permafrost. And now we have NO2, which is actually more of a greenhouse gas warming effect than even methane, nitrous oxide. Fun facts. Heat gains and losses in the Nordic seas. Review of Arctic ice, heat loss, AW inflow. A detailed examination. Alaska snow crab crisis, crab season canceled. Ancient viruses in our DNA and health. Earth energy imbalance. Earth is warming, so my handwriting gets a little scribbly. I'm more than halfway done this review already, though. I can't see the time on the thing, but I feel like this will be like a 10-minute video. Global warming effects on infectious diseases. Okay, so here's another great section that Jim Massa did. This is a COP27 critique, and I'll go through this a little bit more extensively for a minute. COP27 has sealed humanity's fate. Keeping under 1.5C long gone. And then Jim says, COP is being used by developing nations to make their own money. COP27 national climate plans insufficient to avert. COP27 methane action plans any good? Question mark. And he talks about calling natural gas transformational. And I just have like a LOL in all caps. COP27 ocean warming moves much faster and deeper. COP27 Arctic wildfires new feedback mechanism. COP27 toothless methane pledge paper tiger. COP27 Canada refuses to support oil and gas phase down. So, and now Canada has had 33 million acres burned. Not that it's their fault, but it's like every country's going to face these effects and continue to try to profit off of the fossil fuels and all that stuff. I don't see any real deviation from that in the geopolitical sphere from my personal observation, aside from watching Jim's channel. Tonga eruption increased water vapor content in atmosphere, and some people were saying certain volcanoes would be good, they contribute to cooling. Well, here they're contributing to water vapor increases, which is more warming than cooling. Pine Island ice shelf melting from below is increasing. That's a very important Antarctic glacier. A scientist that passed away a while ago that was warning about these things in the 60s and 80s before I existed. When my fate was already sealed before I was born. Plankton eating plastics inhibit carbon sequestration. This is a really interesting one. Certain planktons, they eat carbon and they kind of poop it out to the bottom, and it sinks to the bottom of the floor. There's so much plastic now in their waste that it's not sinking to the bottom of the ocean. It's just floating up at the surface. So that carbon's not getting sequestered to depth. Zonal temperature anomalies, review of latest data through 12/22, an overview. Colorado River is drying up. Great Salt Lake is vanishing. Lake drying up equals toxic dust clouds containing arsenic, threatens migratory birds. New mechanism identified that increases Thwaites ice shelf melt rise. And Thwaites is that's like the doomsday glacier in Antarctica that's about to collapse. So it's speeding up. Warm water inflow under FRIS. And that's a region, that's an ice field in Antarctica that is contributes to 10% of all ice discharge. Is Ron ice shelf in Antarctica in trouble? Short answer, yes. Ocean heat and Antarctica's ice shelves. Eastern Pacific Oscillation. All right, almost got through all of them. There was really a couple that I wanted to touch on. There was a review, I don't know if I passed it already. There was this 2022 review where Jim highlighted, and you can search it on his videos, he highlighted heat anomalies late 2022 in the Antarctic in the Southern Ocean. And I thought that was really interesting because a lot of the conversation this year has had to do with how anomalous, how Antarctic ice is in like a 7 sigma below standard deviation, like 2 million square kilometers lower than it has been on average, even for the last 20, 30 years. So I thought it was really interesting that Jim highlighted that there have been warm ocean anomalies in the seasons preceding the record ice loss. And we got to 1.95 million kilometers squared of ice extent in Antarctica this year, February 2023, which I wasn't even paying attention to, which now I'm going to be paying way more attention to because we could have a blue ocean event in Antarctica in the southern hemisphere first before we have one in the northern hemisphere. And that's really interesting to think about. All right, so last couple pages, we'll wrap up here. Water masses of the ocean, emphasis on Atlantic. And I have a nice little chart. Jim helps with these really detailed picture slideshows. I'm going to be able to draw ocean currents and stuff just from watching a few of these videos. And again, these are all the reasons I'm giving this 5 skulls, everything I've been talking about the last however many minutes. Sea ice loss in Baffin Bay, delay in autumn sea ice from Arctic amplification, and the gyres, that's important stuff. Increasing sea surface temperature sets pace for sea level rise, thermal expansion. Major problem, catastrophic. Okay, so they had a laptop issue, so I'm glad that's been fixed for Jim, but I did report that in my notes. Methane and Permian mass extinction event. I know what it's like to have laptop issues. Ecosystem loss makes climate change worse. Wetlands emit more CH4 than previously thought. Special announcement paper published. Congrats to Jim. He co-authored a paper with Guy McPherson recently. Congrats, Jim, on that. Contributes to certain losses and certain changes in ocean dynamics. Ocean acidification leads to decline in diatoms. Roots are getting shallower. This is bad news. Loss of soil means, I'm going to read some details about that. Loss of soil means more carbon back into the atmosphere. Increase in erosional runoff can't hold as much soil. Decreased nutrient availability means we're losing farmland. So like that was one of the videos I wanted to really touch on the notes of. Okay, last couple ones. Wetlands remove atmospheric carbon. Marine anoxia linked to abrupt global warming. Phytoplankton blooms on Arctic shelf bottoms. Nitrate levels changing in Beaufort Gyre and Chuck GC. Changes in Arctic Halocene. 2012 started that change. Very interesting. That's that record low year. Rapid degradation of Arctic seafloor permafrost. Starvation in Africa will increase with global warming. CO2 and increased temperatures. It's basic physics. Soot particles kill thousands annually. Fine particles are more dangerous, that PM 2.5 that's been spreading everywhere from Canada wildfires. The mega risks human face. Jim says 4C by 2050 equals extinction. That was a good point. I had to double line. Atmospheric river impacts on Arctic sea ice. Unless emissions are reduced, MEEE in oceans will occur. Ice algal mats, important primary producers. So I wanted to talk about the last couple ones. Algal mats are these mats of algae that form on ice that's been there for many years. And when the ice melts, they're so dense and heavy, they just sink to the floor. And that affects a lot of different phytoplankton that consume the algae and different marine species that also consume the algae and species that use it to grow. And then the last couple ones, past and future ocean warming trends, slantwise convection in the Irreversible Sea. The Irreversible Sea is in the southeast of Greenland. I thought that convection was really interesting because the transfer of water mixing with heat and density usually happens very vertically. And that article Jim was reviewing talks about how slantwise convection, wind is pushing it down at an angle instead of straight. So it's going this way, which actually speeds up the mixing, which is contributing to stratification. So I think I'm like 10-15 minutes if my oven clock. I definitely be keeping time, but I definitely want everyone to check out Jim Massa-science's channel, like some of his videos. Be sure to like this video if you found everything I talked about interesting.